generally about the role of the working class in your work. And it starts with a very specific point for me. It starts with a revolutionary anniversary, which is the change of your birth date. KENDELL GEERS is born in May '68. That's what's written on the resume. What motivated that decision?
It was the middle of the year 2000. I decided to take 1 year off. I had reached a point in my life where things were going very well for me as an artist, and I became suspicious of that. It seemed that I needed more. It seemed that art needed more, and I wanted to take the time to reflect on that. And I decided to make a radical decision to say, for 1 year, I'm not going to make a single work of art. And I'm going to take the time to spend 1 year reading, researching, going to museums, reanimating myself, reconfiguring to try to understand what could I be as an artist. And in essence, I guess what that year was about was for me to leave behind the politics of having been born into apartheid South Africa, leave behind the way of seeing the world, the very Cold War, polemic, first-degree way of understanding politics, and enter into a spiritual journey, enter into a spiritual quest. And I remember when I sat in the office at the Palais Tokyo, and they said, okay, what's your conclusion after 1 year of working, searching, researching? What is the conclusion? What are you going to exhibit? And I told them a matchstick. The thing is, it's not just a matchstick, it's an unlit matchstick. And that spark could become the Great Fire of London in 1666. The spark implicit in that, and it's an apprentice matchstick. The full potential for me of art, of spirit, the full potential of everything that I was thinking about and searching for was contained in that piece of wood, in the nature of that wood. So that was the first time I stopped making art for about a year. The second time wasn't by choice. So the second time I stopped making art was in preparing my retrospective at the Haus der Kunst. And the reason why I was unable to attend Nicolas' lectures, because I was in a deep depression. I was in an extremely deep depression where I couldn't see anybody, I didn't want to speak to anybody. And again, I took a year to reflect, not by choice. You know, it was the circumstance, and it was, in a way, in 2000, I gave up on notions of politics. But last year, the year before, it was also for me trying to give up on an art system that doesn't care about the artist. I had to resign myself from an art system that doesn't care about the person or what I make, and that I get instrumentalized by a system and search for something even more profound, something even more mystical, even more spiritual, something that could carry me as an artist and as a person. And I'm coming out of that now with a new body of work and a new way of seeing and a reconfiguration of my understandings of art. But it's not like I'm not the person I was before, because I'm still that person. And we grow, we change, we develop, we shed our skin. So I was born into a working class white Afrikaans family in South Africa, which is pretty much the worst place in the world you can be born. As a working class person, I was denied the education and the sensitivity that one might take for granted with a better education. But made all the worse by what I call the perversity of my birth and the birth of my perversity, which is a text I wrote, trying to address this question of being born into the very family for whom apartheid was invented. Afrikaans working class people benefited the most out of apartheid. And realizing at some point that I was culturally, morally, educationally, spiritually illegitimate had a huge effect on my understanding. And it was throughout that I finally saved myself, because what many of you might be able to take for granted is what your father or mother or church or teachers or priests taught you is something that you can hold dear for your entire life. It's something that you can believe in. It's something that can guide you through life. But every single thing, my father, my priest, my school, my president, the police, every figure of authority in my life taught me a big fat white lie. And I had to reinvent myself. I literally had to start again with a new language, a new name. I was born Jacobus Hermanus Peter Geers. I became Kendell. I gave birth to myself. Since that day, I've been on a journey trying to reinvent my language, my name, my morality, every single thing. And part of that process was, in giving birth to myself, I had to choose a date of birth. And my date of birth I chose was May 1968. As a person born into the working class, you start to see how power relations function. You start to understand access to being spoken for or speaking for yourself or being spoken for. Because what the working classes don't have is the ability to speak and define themselves, which is something I understood during the apartheid struggle, is the ability of people to define who they are, as opposed to somebody else telling you who you are. And at the risk of generalizing, working class people also tend to be very much more connected to the raw materials of their labor, the raw materials of life, the raw materials of very basic foods, very basic places to sleep, to live. And in the basicness of the raw materials, they have a contact with the earth, which is very different than the higher up you go in society, the less contact you have with the earth. And so, as an artist, one of the things I've tried to do is drag four-letter words into the gallery, because four-letter words represent the working class. Drag revolution into gallery, social change into the gallery, drag contestation, contradiction.
The idea of the visitor of one of your exhibitions as feeling fragile or vulnerable. And you write that you want the visitor to become aware of his or her own body. That's also something which relates to the idea of activity.
I became very interested in how one can work with violence or the forbidden or the stolen or the risk in an art gallery in order to make people more conscious and self-aware of their presence, so that looking at art was an active rather than a passive relation, so that art required an engagement, a demand on the viewer, in order to accept their responsibility, that looking at a work of art demands responsibility. Your responsibility for being there. Why are you there? Because getting into that gallery brings you through a number of different paths that involve your class, your history, your education, your financial position. You're not going to end up in an art gallery by chance. And that's what I find interesting about the art gallery. It's not a football stadium. You're not going to go to an art gallery for entertainment. You're not going to go to an art gallery to do the Mexican wave. You're going to go to an art gallery to engage and be engaged. And the more conscious one can make that process, I think then artworks can really come into their own and be what they are, talismans or totems or catalysts of change. The way you deal with your body space, that politics plays out. Your body is your body, and you have the right to do with your body what you want. And politics in the beginning, and religion, but now certainly advertising and commercialism and the way the world is functioning today, we are taken further and further away from our bodies. We don't have rights anymore to how we govern our bodies. And that for me is both a spiritual question, but it's also a physical question. It's also a political question. The role of and how morality is used in the governance of what you can or can't do with your own body. And in the art galleries, the last political zone where we still have freedom. The art gallery, or the art system, the works of art, is the last space on the planet where we can speak openly. In art, we can still speak freely. Artists can still actually voice oppositional, political, or can speak without censure. And so for me that becomes an incredible opportunity and an incredible right, or an incredible freedom that I try to take seriously, to be able to make works of art that question power, question hierarchies, challenge the way we position ourselves as people in the world. I'll give you a very interesting example. So I had a big discussion in the museum one day where I was exhibiting my broken glass sculptures. The museum was trying to say to me that this is a very dangerous work of art, and they wanted to shut it down. But it was a group show. And I had to say, but with all due respect, what's interesting is that when you are standing in front of my broken glass, you become aware that your body is fragile. You become aware that you can get punctured by the glass. We have installed within us a survival mechanism. No human being, unless you want to commit suicide, is going to go and throw themselves onto a pile of broken glass. We're going to walk carefully around that glass, and you're going to become aware of your body, how you move, your relationship between your body space and the sculpture body space. Art was a necessity for me in order to survive, in order to start to reclaim my body, to reclaim my identity, to reclaim my space as a person, as an artist, as a being, as a white, working class Afrikaans African. And as time has gone on, I understand now the necessity of art to engage with the world that I'm living in, to engage with the site of the gallery space, which for me is a very sacred space. And what I do now in terms of the risk is no longer me making you aware of the danger of your body space, but now it becomes making the viewer aware of the danger of their mind space, the danger of ideas, the danger of imagination, the danger of a head space. And what's interesting, I always compare the shamanic doctor, the shaman, with the Western doctor. When you go today in Paris to see a doctor, first of all, they're probably going to be very abusive and unpleasant to you, but they will give you drugs. When you see a shamanic doctor, the doctor takes the drugs to cure you. It's a different way of seeing the world, obviously. And the risk that I enter into now in the studio is I put myself at risk. When I'm making my paintings and when I'm making my sculptures, because now I'm making sculptures again, I enter into an altered state of consciousness where I am putting myself in risk. I'm taking myself to that space which so many artists have spoken about in the past, which is that space where you go to the precipice of consciousness, the precipice of your imagination, the precipice of what you can conceive, and you go a little bit further and you're staring into that abyss. It's very important for me to re-engage with this idea of the potential of art, that art has these deep, profound mysteries. And to forget about what's happening today in the market, to forget about what's sexy, hip, and popular, and fashionable, but actually look back at artists I respect, and writers, and take the risk now deeper, much, 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 much deeper. I'd like to share something with you all.
Wow. So what's that? We can start here.
Après vous.
Be careful, because this is the origin of the universe that you have in your hands. I made these sculptures by throwing wax into water. Now, of course, wax and water don't mix. Wax and water will have a chemical reaction, and the wax will always float on the water. And what's happening right now is you are all participating in the destruction of this work of art. And I want you to feel it in your hands. Feel the texture. Feel the space between the inside and the outside. The origin of life starts in the darkness, out of which is born the universe, out of this egg. And as you touch it, your body is making contact with it, and you're sweating, and your hands, whether you realize it or not, are destroying the copper, it's going to turn green. In 2 weeks, wherever you have touched that sculpture is going to be green. But that's about the process of change. That's about the process of things that you can't control. That's about the process of transformation. But holding it in your hands, you will feel the chaos and the struggle that I go through to give birth to something I cannot control.